Some say miracles don't happen in grocery stores. But on a Tuesday afternoon in Chicago, between the cereal aisle and Register 5, one mother's moment of despair became the spark that would change countless lives. It wasn't just about a basketball legend buying groceries for a crying mom. It was about how a single act of kindness could launch a movement that would transform healthcare in communities across America. But first, there was Sarah Martinez, standing in line with her 3 hungry children, holding a debit card she knew would be declined. Sarah Martinez's hands shook as she dug through her purse for the 3rd time. The line of customers behind her at Register 5 was getting longer, and she could feel their stares burning into her back. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst right through her faded blue nurse's scrubs, the same ones she still wore even though she hadn't worked a shift in 2 months. "Mommy, I'm hungry," 6-year-old Emma whispered, tugging at her sleeve. "Can we get the cereal now?" Sarah looked down at her youngest daughter's hopeful brown eyes and felt her throat tighten. The box of Cheerios sat on the conveyor belt, along with other basics: milk, bread, peanut butter, and some marked-down fruit that was nearly too ripe. She hadn't even gotten everything they needed, but the total on the register's display already read $78.43. "Just 1 more minute, sweetie," Sarah managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. She pulled out her debit card again, knowing in her heart it would be declined, just like the first 2 times she'd tried it. But she had to try. Her 3 kids hadn't had a proper breakfast in days. The cashier, a teenager with kind eyes and a name tag that read Jenny, gave her a sympathetic, "Look, would you like to try it again, ma'am?" Behind her, someone sighed loudly. Another person muttered something about getting another register open. Sarah's cheeks burned as she handed over the card one last time. She watched Jenny swipe it, her stomach twisting into knots as she waited for the inevitable error message. The machine beeped its rejection, and Sarah's last shred of hope crumbled. "I'm sorry," Jenny said softly. "It's not going through." Emma's small hand tightened around Sarah's fingers. "Mommy, why are you crying?" Sarah hadn't even realized the tears had started falling. She quickly wiped them away with her free hand, but more kept coming. 2 months without work had drained every penny of her savings. The hospital's budget cuts had swept through like a tornado, taking her job and the jobs of 12 other nurses with it. Now here she was, a skilled medical professional with 15 years of experience, unable to buy groceries for her children. "Is everything all right over here?" A deep voice cut through her thoughts. The store manager, a tall man in a crisp blue vest, approached the register. Sarah's embarrassment deepened. She could picture how this looked: a grown woman crying into the checkout line while holding up other customers. "I'm sorry," she stammered, reaching for her bags. "I'll put everything back." Emma's bottom lip trembled. "But Mommy, Miguel needs his peanut butter sandwich for lunch tomorrow." The thought of her 12-year-old son going to school hungry again made fresh tears spill down Sarah's cheeks. Miguel had been so brave about it all, never complaining when dinner portions got smaller or when she had to tell him they couldn't afford new basketball shoes to replace his worn-out ones. And Carmen, her quiet 10th grader, had given up her art classes without a word of protest when they needed the money. For bills instead. "Ma'am?" The manager's voice softened. "Maybe we could—" "Please," Sarah cut him off, her pride already in shreds. "Just let me put the items back. I'm sorry for holding up the line." Her hands trembled as she reached for the grocery bags. The fluorescent lights suddenly felt too bright, the store too crowded. The whispers from the other customers seemed to grow louder with each passing second. Sarah's scrubs felt like they were suffocating her, a constant reminder of the career she'd lost, the stability that had slipped away from her family. She thought about the stack of bills waiting at home, the past due notice from the electric company, the rent she wasn't sure how she'd pay next week, the letter from Miguel's school about unpaid lunch fees. She'd applied for every nursing position within 50 miles, but hospitals everywhere were cutting back. The few private clinics that were hiring wanted specialized certifications she couldn't afford to get. Emma's small voice broke through her spiral of worry. "Mommy, why is that man watching us?" Sarah looked up, following her daughter's gaze toward the end of the aisle. Through her tears, she could make out a tall figure in a baseball cap standing near the magazine rack. Something about him seemed familiar, but she couldn't place it through the fog of her embarrassment and despair. The manager was still hovering nearby, speaking quietly with Jenny the cashier. Sarah knew they were probably trying to decide how to handle this situation. She'd been on the other side of similar scenes during better times, buying groceries for patients' families who were struggling. Now here she was, the helper needing help, the nurse who couldn't even provide basic necessities for her own children. "I'll start putting these back," Jenny offered kindly, reaching for the grocery bags. "No," Sarah said, her voice cracking. "Please, let me do it. I need to." She couldn't finish the sentence. What she needed was her job back. She needed to stop disappointing her children. She needed a miracle. Emma wrapped her arms around Sarah's waist, pressing her face into her mother's scrubs. "It's okay, Mommy. We can have toast again. I don't mind." Those simple words, her 6-year-old trying to be brave, trying to make things easier, were what finally broke her completely. Sarah's legs felt weak, and she gripped the edge of the checkout counter to stay upright. 2 months of holding it together, of telling her children things would get better, of pretending she wasn't terrified about their future, came crashing down around her in the fluorescent-lit aisle of a grocery store on a Tuesday afternoon. What kind of mother couldn't even buy food for her children? Through her tears, she was vaguely aware of movement at the end of the aisle. The man in the baseball cap had started walking toward them, but Sarah couldn't focus on anything except the sound of her daughter's gentle breathing against her side and the crushing weight of failure pressing down on her shoulders. She never expected that this moment, this horrible, humiliating moment, would be the one that would change everything. The man in the baseball cap was about to make sure of that. Michael Jordan hadn't planned on going to the grocery store that afternoon. He was supposed to be at a meeting about his foundation's new healthcare initiative, but something about the sunny Chicago day had made him want to handle the charity event shopping himself. Now, standing near the magazine rack where his own face stared back at him from half a dozen covers, he knew exactly why he'd been meant to be here. The nurse's scrubs had caught his eye first. They were the same shade of blue his mother used to wear when she worked at the hospital, back when every extra shift meant maybe they could afford new school shoes or a better Christmas. He'd noticed how worn the woman's scrubs were at the edges, how they hung a little loose like she'd lost weight recently. Then he'd seen her kids. The older girl hung back, trying to disappear into the shelves of cereal boxes, shoulders curved inward like she was carrying an invisible weight. The boy stood protectively close to his mother, one hand resting on his little sister's shoulder. But it was the youngest one, with her innocent questions and worried eyes, that brought back memories hitting harder than any defensive guard he'd ever faced on the court. "Mommy, I'm hungry." Those words transported him back 40 years to times when his own mother had to make impossible choices at grocery store checkouts. He remembered the way she'd held her head high, even when things were so tight it hurt. Just like this woman was trying to do now, even as tears slid down her cheeks. Michael shifted his weight, adjusting his baseball cap lower over his eyes. He wasn't here for attention. The charity event supplies in his cart were just an excuse to feel normal for an afternoon. But watching this scene unfold, he couldn't help but think about all the times his mother had said, "Someday, baby, things will be different." For him, they had been. He'd made sure his mother never had to worry about a grocery bill again. But this woman in the faded scrubs. He noticed the way she stood, straight-backed despite her tears, one hand protectively on her daughter's shoulder. The nurse's shoes were quality ones, just worn down from years of 12-hour shifts on hard hospital floors. Everything about her spoke of someone who helped others for a living, who was used to being the one people leaned on, until now. The store manager's appearance had only made things worse. Michael could read the woman's pride in every line of her body as she offered to put the groceries back. He knew that pride. His mother had taught him about it, the kind that keeps you going when everything else is falling apart. His hand moved to his back pocket, where his wallet sat thick with the success he'd earned. But something held him back for a moment. His mother's voice echoed in his memory. "It's not just about giving help, baby. It's about giving dignity, too." The little girl, Emma, he'd heard her mother call her, looked his way again. There was something about her eyes that reminded him of his own daughter at that age. The way she tried to comfort her mother with a hug twisted something in his chest. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Probably his assistant wondering where he was, why he wasn't at the foundation meeting about their new healthcare worker support program. The program that was still missing something, some way to make it more than just another charitable initiative. Michael Jordan had won 6 NBA championships. He'd made game-winning shots with the weight of entire cities on his shoulders. But watching this scene in a grocery store on a random Tuesday afternoon, he felt the same certainty he used to feel in those last seconds of a tied game. This moment mattered. He looked down at his cart full of supplies for the charity event. The foundation's new program was supposed to launch next week, designed to help healthcare workers who'd lost their jobs due to budget cuts. They had the funding in place, the framework ready. But they'd been missing something. A face for the program. A story that would inspire others to get involved. Until now. Michael stepped forward, his decision made. He'd learned long ago that sometimes the biggest impacts came from the smallest moments. His mother had taught him that too, along with something else. When you see someone in need, you don't just give them a hand, you help them find their way back to standing tall. The woman was still crying softly, her daughter's arms wrapped around her waist. The cashier looked uncomfortable, the manager uncertain. Other customers shifted, impatiently in line, their own lives too busy for someone else's crisis. But Michael Jordan had all the time in the world for this moment. He took another step forward, and then another. Sometimes the most important assists in life happened far from any basketball court. And he was about to make one that would change more lives than just the family standing at register 5. "Excuse me," a deep voice said from behind Sarah. "I'd like to help." Sarah quickly wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, trying to compose herself. The last thing she wanted was charity from a stranger, no matter how kind the offer. She'd seen the man watching earlier, and somehow that made it worse, knowing he'd witnessed her entire breakdown. "That's very kind," she managed to say, her voice still shaky. "But I couldn't possibly—" "Ma'am," the tall man interrupted gently, stepping closer. His baseball cap was pulled low, but something about the way he carried himself made several people in line straighten up and pay attention. "I understand pride. My mama taught me all about it. But she also taught me that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is let someone else help carry the load for a minute." Miguel, who had been quiet this whole time, suddenly sucked in a sharp breath. His eyes went wide as he stared at the man, then darted to the magazine rack where dozens of familiar faces stared back. Sarah followed his gaze, confusion mixing with her embarrassment. "Oh my God," Miguel whispered. "Mom, that's—" "Please," the man said quickly, holding up a hand. "Let's just handle this first." He stepped up to the register and pulled out his wallet. "Jenny," he said, reading the cashier's name tag, "I'd like to take care of this family's groceries." And he glanced at Sarah's half-empty cart. "Anything else they need to add to their list?" The store manager, who had been hovering nearby throughout the whole scene, suddenly straightened his blue vest and stepped forward. "Mr. J," he started to say, but stopped when the tall man shook his head slightly. Emma tugged at Sarah's scrubs again, but this time her voice was filled with excitement instead of worry. "Mommy! That's the man from Miguel's posters, the one who flies!" And suddenly, Sarah knew why the man looked so familiar. Even with the baseball cap and casual clothes, there was no mistaking Michael Jordan once you knew who you were looking at. Her cheeks, already flushed from crying, burned even hotter. "Mr. Jordan," she said quietly, "I appreciate the offer, but I can't accept—" "You know what I was doing when I was about your son's age?" Jordan asked, nodding toward Miguel, who looked like he might pass out from excitement. "I was watching my mama work double shifts as a nurse, just like you, coming home with her feet aching, but never complaining, making miracles happen with whatever we had." He paused, his voice growing softer. "And you know what I promised myself? That if I ever made it, really made it, I'd never walk past someone who reminded me of her without trying to help." Sarah felt fresh tears forming, but these were different from the ones of shame and desperation she'd shed earlier. "I lost my job," she found herself saying. "The hospital had budget cuts, and—" "I know," Jordan said, and somehow his voice carried both understanding and determination. "Those scrubs, they're not just clothes to you, are they? They're who you are." Carmen, who had been trying to disappear into the background, suddenly spoke up. "Mom's the best nurse ever," she said fiercely. "She used to come home and tell us about all the people she helped, the babies she took care of, the families she talked to when they were scared." Jordan smiled, and it transformed his whole face. "That doesn't surprise me one bit." Now, he turned to Jenny the cashier, who was trying very hard to maintain her professional composure despite clearly being starstruck. "Let's ring this up. And ma'am," he looked back at Sarah, "I want you to get everything your family needs. Not just what you think you should ask for, what you actually need." The store manager jumped in. "I can help with that. We can get another cart." "Mom," Miguel whispered urgently, tugging at her sleeve. Can I get cereal? The good kind?" Sarah looked at Jordan, who gave her an encouraging nod. "Remember what I said about my mama? About pride? Sometimes the best thing we can teach our kids is how to accept kindness with grace. They're watching, you know. They're always watching and learning from how we handle the tough moments." Emma, who had been bouncing with excitement, suddenly wrapped her arms around Jordan's legs. "Thank you for helping my mommy not cry anymore." "Emma!" Sarah gasped, mortified. But Jordan just laughed, a warm, genuine sound that seemed to fill the whole store. "You're very welcome, young lady," he said, carefully detaching himself and crouching down to Emma's level. "You know what? I bet you're a great helper to your mom, aren't you?" Emma nodded solemnly. "I eat all my toast, even when it's not my favorite breakfast." Something flickered across Jordan's face. Understanding, maybe, or memory. He stood up and turned to Sarah. "Would you let me help? Not just with groceries, but maybe with something bigger?" Sarah hesitated. The pride that had kept her going through 2 months of unemployment, through countless job rejections, through nights of lying awake wondering how to make it all work. That pride was still there. But so was the memory of Emma's brave little voice saying she didn't mind having toast again. "I don't know how I'd ever repay—" "You already have," Jordan interrupted. "Every patient you've ever helped, every family you've comforted. That's the kind of repayment that matters. Sometimes life brings us full circle, you know. Maybe it's your turn to let someone else be the caregiver for a minute." The store had grown quieter. Other customers watching the scene unfold. Some had their phones out, probably recording. Sarah knew this moment would probably end up online, become some viral story about Michael Jordan's kindness. But somehow, looking at his earnest expression, she knew this wasn't about publicity for him. "Miguel," Jordan said suddenly, turning to her son, who looked like he might explode from trying to contain his excitement. "Want to help me pick out some groceries for your family?" Miguel looked at Sarah, his eyes pleading. She nodded, and her son's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Can I?" Miguel swallowed hard, gathering his courage. "Can I show you my basketball shooting form while we shop?" Jordan laughed again. "Tell you what, you help me make sure we get everything your family needs, and then maybe we can talk some basketball. Deal?" As Miguel practically floated down the aisle with his hero, Carmen slipped her hand into Sarah's. "It's okay, Mom," she whispered. "Sometimes good things just happen." Sarah watched as Jordan listened intently to Miguel explaining why his sisters liked certain brands of pasta, as Emma skipped alongside them, pointing out colorful fruits, as the store manager hurried to help them find everything they needed. She saw the genuine interest in Jordan's face as Miguel talked, the way he included Carmen in the decisions, how he made Emma giggle with silly jokes about vegetables. This was more than just a celebrity being charitable. This was someone who understood, really understood, what it meant to watch your mother struggle. Someone who hadn't forgotten where he came from, even after all his success. "Ma'am?" Jenny the cashier said softly. "Would you like to put your groceries in your car while they shop? I can help you." Sarah looked down at the bags of groceries. Groceries she could now actually take home to her children. "Yes," she said, her voice stronger than it had been all day. "Yes, thank you." As she followed Jenny toward the exit, Sarah glanced back over her shoulder. Jordan was showing Miguel how to pick the best bananas, making it seem like the most important lesson in the world. But there was something in his expression, something thoughtful and determined, that made Sarah wonder if this chance encounter was about to become more than just a story about groceries. She had no idea just how right she was. While Jenny helped, Sarah loaded the first round of groceries into her worn Honda Civic. Michael Jordan was learning more about the family he'd felt called to help. Miguel walked beside him through the aisles, no longer starstruck but talking animatedly about his mom's nursing career. "She was in the NICU," Miguel explained, carefully selecting a box of pasta. "That's where they take care of the really tiny babies. Mom says some of them are no bigger than a soda can." Jordan nodded, his mind going back to the foundation meeting he was supposed to be attending. "Your mom must be really good with the little ones." "The best," Carmen added quietly, pushing their second cart. "She used to come home and tell us stories about the babies she helped save. Some of the families even sent her Christmas cards every year to show her how their kids were growing up." Emma, who was riding in the cart Jordan pushed, piped up. "Mommy wants to be a different kind of nurse now. One that helps lots of kids." Jordan's interest sharpened. "What kind of nurse is that?" "A pediatric nurse practitioner," Carmen answered. "Mom's been wanting to go back to school for it, but..." She trailed off, looking down at her shoes. But it costs too much money, Miguel finished. Even before Mom lost her job, we couldn't afford it. Jordan was quiet for a moment, pushing the cart down the cereal aisle where this whole encounter had started. The Foundation's new healthcare initiative had been missing something, a personal connection, a story that could inspire others. As he listened to these kids talk about their mother with such pride, pieces started falling into place in his mind. "Tell me more about what your mom wants to do," he said, reaching for a box of Cheerios, the same kind Sarah had tried to buy earlier. "She wants to have her own practice someday," Miguel said, "to help kids who don't have enough money to go to regular doctors. She says lots of families can't afford medical care, and nurse practitioners can help fill in the gaps." Jordan thought about his own mother, about her dreams of advancing in the medical field that she'd put aside to raise her children, about all the times she'd talked about wanting to do more, help more, be more, but never having the opportunity. The store manager, who had been hovering nearby trying to be helpful without being obvious about it, spoke up. "Mrs. Martinez used to volunteer at the free clinic over on Madison Street too, on her days off." Something clicked in Jordan's mind. The Foundation's new program wasn't just about helping unemployed healthcare workers, it was about investing in their futures, about creating a ripple effect of care that could touch thousands of lives. Sarah returned just then, looking more composed, but still slightly overwhelmed. "The groceries are in the car," she said. "Mr. Jordan, I can't thank you enough." "Michael," he corrected gently, "and we're not quite finished shopping yet." He gestured to the carts that her children had helped fill with enough food to stock their pantry properly for the first time in months. Sarah's eyes widened at the amount of food, but before she could protest, Jordan asked, "Tell me about your dream of becoming a nurse practitioner." The question caught her off guard. "How did you—" She looked at her children, who tried their best to appear innocent. "Mom's really smart," Emma announced proudly. "She helps me read big words like stethoscope and thermometer." Jordan smiled, but kept his focus on Sarah. "Why pediatric nurse practitioner? What made you choose that path?" Something in his tone, the genuine interest, the lack of judgment, made Sarah answer honestly. "There's such a need for affordable pediatric care in our community. Nurse practitioners can provide many of the same services as physicians, but at a lower cost. And with my NICU experience—" She paused, then continued with growing passion. "I've seen so many families struggle to access basic health care for their children. If I could open a practice that serves underprivileged communities—" She stopped suddenly, realizing she'd been speaking as if her dreams were still possible. "Well, it doesn't matter now. The certification program costs more than I could save in 5 years, even if I had my job back." Jordan was quiet for a moment, studying her with the same intensity he'd once used to read opponents on the basketball court. "You know," he said finally, "I was supposed to be at a Foundation meeting right now." "Oh, I'm so sorry to keep you." He held up a hand, stopping her apology. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Our foundation is launching a new program next week. It's designed to help healthcare workers who've been affected by budget cuts, but it's been missing something crucial." Sarah looked confused, but Jordan continued, "We've been looking for someone who embodies everything the program stands for: dedication to patient care, commitment to community service, desire to advance their skills to help others." Understanding began to dawn in Sarah's eyes, but she shook her head slightly. "Mr. Jordan, Michael, you can't mean—" "Mom!" Miguel burst out, unable to contain himself. "He's talking about helping you go back to school." "Nothing's decided yet," Jordan said quickly. seeing the mix of hope and fear on Sarah's face. "But I'd like to get your contact information, if you're willing. The foundation would be very interested in talking with you further." The store manager, who had been pretending not to eavesdrop, suddenly appeared with a pen and paper. Sarah took them with trembling hands, writing down her information while Emma hugged her legs, and Carmen tried not to cry. "There's one more thing," Jordan said as she handed back the paper. He pulled out his phone and showed her the screen, a text message about the meeting he'd missed. "The foundation team is still at the office. Would you and your children like to come with me to meet them? Right now?" Sarah looked down at her worn scrubs, but Jordan shook his head. "Those scrubs tell your story. They show exactly who you are. Someone who's dedicated their life to helping others. Sometimes the right person at the right moment can change everything. My mother taught me that." He glanced at the groceries in their carts. "We can have these delivered to your home. Right now, I think there's somewhere more important we need to be." Sarah looked at her children's hopeful faces, then back at Jordan. She thought about all the nights she'd spent researching nurse practitioner programs, all the times she'd pushed the dream aside because it seemed impossible. She thought about the families she could help, the children she could serve, the difference she could make with advanced training. "Yes," she said finally, her voice strong and clear. "Yes, we'd like to come with you." As they walked toward the store exit, Sarah, her 3 children, and the basketball legend who had somehow appeared in their lives at exactly the right moment, none of them could have predicted how this grocery store encounter would ripple out to touch hundreds of lives in the years to come. But Michael Jordan knew one thing for certain. His mother would have been proud of this assist. The video hit social media before Sarah and her family even reached the foundation's offices. Someone in the grocery store had captured the moment. Michael Jordan crouched down to talk to Emma, and within hours, it had gone viral. But for Sarah, sitting in the passenger seat of Jordan's car while her children whispered excitedly in the back, social media was the last thing on her mind. "Miguel," Jordan called over his shoulder, "you said you wanted to show me your shooting form. The foundation has a small court in the building. Maybe we can make that happen after our meeting." Miguel's eyes lit up like fireworks. "Really? Mom, did you hear that?" Sarah smiled, still trying to process how her terrible day had transformed so completely. Just hours ago, she'd been counting change in her purse, hoping to afford enough food for the week. Now she was heading to meet with one of the most famous charitable foundations in Chicago. "Your phone's buzzing," Carmen pointed out quietly. Sarah pulled it from her pocket and gasped. 27 missed calls, dozens of text messages, and hundreds of social media notifications flashed across her screen. "Oh my," she breathed. Jordan glanced over. "Yeah, that happens. Don't worry. The foundation's PR team will help you handle it. Right now, let's focus on what matters." They pulled into an underground parking garage, and Jordan led them to a private elevator. Emma held tight to Sarah's hand, suddenly shy in the fancy building. The elevator opened directly into a large office space where a group of people sat around a conference table surrounded by papers and laptops. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jordan announced as they entered, "I'd like you to meet Sarah Martinez and her family. She's exactly who we've been looking for." The next hour was a blur of introductions and explanations. The foundation team explained their new healthcare initiative, a program designed to help experienced nurses advance their careers while serving underprivileged communities. They needed someone to be the face of the program, someone whose story could inspire others. "We've been missing the human element," explained Patricia Chen, the program director. "Numbers and statistics are important, but people connect with stories. Your journey, Mrs. Martinez, from NICU nurse to losing your job, to wanting to become a nurse practitioner to help underserved children. It's exactly the kind of story that could inspire others to apply for our program. While the adults talked, Emma had fallen asleep in a comfortable office chair, and Carmen was helping Miguel practice what he would say to Jordan on the basketball court. Sarah watched her children, thinking about how their lives could change if this was real. The scholarship would cover everything, Patricia continued. Tuition, books, living expenses while you study. And once you complete the program, we'd help you set up your practice in a community that needs it most. Sarah's hands trembled in her lap. It sounds too good to be true. Sometimes good things just happen, Mom. Carmen repeated her words from the store, making everyone smile. Just then, Sarah's phone buzzed again. This time, it was her former supervisor from the hospital. "Excuse me," she said, stepping away to take the call. "Sarah? I just saw the video," her supervisor said, without preamble. "Listen, I've had 3 other hospitals call me asking for a reference for you. They all want to offer you positions." The room started to spin slightly. "Positions? Good ones. Better than what you had here. One's even offering to help with nurse practitioner certification. I know you've always wanted to." Sarah looked over at Jordan, who was showing Miguel something on his phone while they waited for her. He caught her eye and smiled, seeming to understand exactly what the call was about. After she hung up, Patricia leaned forward. "You have options now, Mrs. Martinez. That's good. You should have options. But before you decide anything, I'd like you to hear the full scope of what we're planning." She pressed a button, and a projection screen lowered from the ceiling. On it appeared images of a building, worn down but with good bones, located in a neighborhood Sarah recognized as one of Chicago's most underserved areas. "This would be your clinic," Patricia said softly. "Once you complete your certification, the foundation would help you renovate it, staff it, make it everything you've dreamed of. A place where any child can get care, regardless of their family's ability to pay." Emma had woken up and wandered over to look at the pictures. "Mommy, is that going to be your doctor place?" Sarah felt tears forming again. Happy tears this time. "Maybe, sweetheart. Maybe." "There's no pressure to decide right now," Jordan said, standing up. "But while you think about it..." He grinned at Miguel. "I believe I promised someone some basketball tips." The foundation team watched in amusement as the greatest basketball player of all time led an ecstatic 12-year-old boy to the building's small court. Carmen followed with her phone ready to record, and Emma skipped alongside them. "Mrs. Martinez," Patricia said gently when they were alone, "I know this is overwhelming, but sometimes the universe puts the right people in the right place at the right time. Today, that happened in a grocery store." Sarah looked down at her worn scrubs, the uniform of a career she'd thought might be over. Now it felt like a symbol of new beginnings. Her phone buzzed again with more messages and calls, but she ignored it. The viral video, the job offers, the sudden attention, none of that mattered as much as the possibility she saw in those building photos. A chance to not just rebuild her own life, but to help others build theirs. From down the hall came the sound of her children laughing, the rhythmic bounce of a basketball, and Jordan's patient voice explaining proper shooting technique to Miguel. The day that had started with tears of desperation was ending with tears of hope. But even as Sarah sat in that conference room, surrounded by possibilities she'd never imagined, she didn't know that the biggest surprise was still to come. Because Michael Jordan wasn't just offering her a scholarship or a future clinic. He was about to offer her something that would change not just her family's life, but the lives of countless others. And it all started with a simple trip to buy groceries. 1 year later, Sarah Martinez stood in front of a small podium, trying to keep her voice steady as she addressed the crowd gathered for the opening of the Jordan Foundation's first community healthcare center. She wore crisp new scrubs, dark blue with the center's logo embroidered over the heart. A basketball transformed into a medical cross. "When I walked into that grocery store last year," she began, "I thought I had lost everything. My job, my confidence, my ability to provide for my children. What I didn't know was that I was about to find something much bigger than myself." In the front row, Emma sat between Carmen and Miguel, all three dressed in their best clothes. Miguel wore the basketball shoes Jordan had given him after their impromptu coaching session. He'd refused to wear them until today, keeping them pristine for this special moment. Next to them sat Patricia Chen from the foundation, and beside her was Michael Jordan himself, watching Sarah with the same quiet intensity he'd shown that day in the store. "Mr. Jordan didn't just buy our groceries that day," Sarah continued. "He showed my children what it means to lift others up when they're down. But what none of us knew then was that this moment would spark something much larger." She gestured to the building behind her, the same worn-down structure from the Foundation's presentation, now transformed into a state-of-the-art pediatric clinic. But it wasn't just any clinic. "Today, we're not just opening a medical facility," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger. "We're launching the Jordan Foundation's Healthcare Heroes program. This center will serve as both a training facility for nurses pursuing advanced degrees and a free clinic for children in our community." The crowd applauded, and Sarah caught sight of familiar faces in the audience. Jenny, the cashier from the grocery store, her old supervisor from the hospital, even some of the other customers who had witnessed that day. They'd all come to be part of this moment. "But the real gift," Sarah continued, "isn't just this building or even the program itself. It's the ripple effect it will create." She paused, looking at Jordan. "When Mr. Jordan shared the story of his mother's dreams of being a nurse, it sparked an idea. What if we could honor her memory by helping other healthcare workers achieve the dreams they've had to put aside?" Jordan nodded slightly, encouraging her to continue. They'd spent months developing this program together, with Sarah's insight as both a nurse and a mother helping to shape every aspect. Starting today, this center will accept applications from nurses who want to advance their careers while serving our community. Each year, we'll select 10 healthcare workers who, like me, have dreams of doing more. They'll receive full scholarships for advanced certification, just like I did. But here's the special part. While they study, they'll also work part-time in this clinic, providing care to families who need it most. Sarah looked at her children, drawing strength from their proud faces. "My daughter Carmen once told me that sometimes good things just happen. But now I know that's not quite true. Good things happen when good people choose to make them happen." She turned a page in her notes, revealing the part of the speech that only a handful of people knew was coming. "And that's why I'm honored to announce that this center isn't just the first. It's a prototype. The Jordan Foundation has committed to opening 5 more centers like this across the country in the next 3 years. Each one will carry on this mission of lifting up healthcare workers while serving communities in need." The crowd erupted in applause. Jordan stood, joining Sarah at the podium. "Sarah's not just our first scholarship recipient," he announced. "She's our program director for national expansion. Her experience, both personal and professional, will help us identify the right communities and the right healthcare workers to create lasting change." Emma bounced in her seat, bursting with excitement. She'd kept this secret for 2 whole weeks, ever since she'd overheard her mom practicing this part of the speech late at night. "You see," Jordan continued, "my mother always told me that true success isn't just about how high you can jump. It's about how many people you can lift up with you. Sarah and her family helped us understand how to do that in a way that creates lasting change. He turned to Sarah. Would you like to tell them about our first round of scholarship recipients? Sarah smiled, pulling out another page. We've selected 10 nurses from across Chicago, each with their own dreams of advancing their careers while serving others. They're here today, and I'd like to invite them to stand. Around the audience, 10 people stood up, each wearing the same look of determined hope that Sarah had worn a year ago. Among them was Jenny from the grocery store, who had been inspired by Sarah's story to go back to school and finish her nursing degree. 1 year ago, Sarah concluded, I couldn't buy groceries for my family. Today, we're launching a program that will help hundreds of healthcare workers advance their careers while providing care to thousands of children who need it most. And it all started because someone chose to see past my tears to my potential. Few looked at her children, then at Jordan, then back at the audience. They say it takes a village to raise a child. Well, it takes a community to lift up its heroes. Today, we're not just opening a clinic, we're creating a new kind of community. One where healthcare workers can achieve their dreams while helping others achieve better lives. The ribbon-cutting ceremony that followed was full of smiles and tears. Happy ones this time. As cameras flashed and the crowd cheered, Sarah felt a small hand slip into hers. Emma looked up at her with shining eyes. Mommy, she whispered, remember when you were crying in the store? Did you ever think that would turn into this? Sarah squeezed her daughter's hand, watching as Miguel showed some of the scholarship recipients his basketball shoes while Carmen helped coordinate the photographers. Jordan was speaking with the new program participants, that same gentle intensity in his expression that she'd first seen in the grocery store. No, sweetie, she answered honestly. I never imagined a trip to buy groceries would change so many lives. She paused, watching a young mother walk up to the clinic's front door, holding the hand of a small child. The sign above them read, James Jordan Memorial Healthcare Center, where dreams take flight. But that's the thing about kindness, Sarah said softly. You never know just how far it will fly. Thank you for being part of this heartwarming journey. Stories of kindness have a way of connecting us all, no matter where we're from. I'd love to know, what city and country are you listening from? Share in the comments below, and if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and share it with someone who could use a reminder that miracles can happen in the most unexpected places, even in grocery stores. Remember, sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can create the biggest changes.